I was kicking, you know what, and taking names, but then I burnt myself out because I was taking 25 clients a week. It's like, this is unsustainable for me. All they see is follower count, achievements, but they have no idea what's under the surface.
All you're seeing is the peak of those cycles. You're not seeing the burnout part.
I would love to, with our conversation, expose that more, right? It's not rainbows and butterflies, and it takes a lot of hard work.
Hi, everyone. Today, I am so happy to be joined by Brooke Schnittman. Brooke is an ADHD and executive coach for neurodivergent individuals of all ages, which I'm really excited to talk about as well. Diagnosed with ADHD as an adult and part of an ADHD family of 5, Brooke is an award-winning coach, the host of Successful with ADHD podcast, which won the 2023 Listener's Choice Award. She's also spoken alongside top health and wellness experts and has been featured in major publications like Ford and Entrepreneur. So welcome, Brooke. I'm glad to be talking strategy with you today.
Thank you, Skye. It's always amazing connecting with like-minded individuals, and I know we have a similar mission, so it's great connecting again.
Yeah. So you mentioned you were diagnosed as an adult. Can you tell me a little bit about what that experience was like with you?
It's strange. I literally dedicated my career to working with people with ADHD. And 6 months after becoming an ADHD coach, I started coaching people online in 2019 and realized that my symptoms were very similar to my clients. So I loved coaching. But then after a coaching session, I would have a hard time doing my notes and coming back to the session. So that was just like the hint into what put all the puzzle pieces together for me for my whole life. And then I started looking back and I was like, oh, I had a hard time with processing. I would always step in the same puddle over and over again because my working memory sucked. Or I would lose my keys. Or, there was a time where our house got robbed actually twice growing up. And they didn't come for my room because there was probably 2 of them and I had mounds of clothes on the floor. So it all started to make sense. And I got the diagnosis, and the tools that I was using with my clients and for myself were helping me cope. And then I added medication, and it all came together as a triage effect. And I felt way more productive. I met my husband 6 months later, and we started a family. So things definitely made a lot of sense after receiving that ADHD diagnosis.
Yeah, and it's funny because people might think, oh, it's really strange that you decided to do this even before you got your own diagnosis. But people are funny like that. Sometimes I was teaching developmental, psychology before I got any diagnosis. And I think that we find these things interesting if there's something that maybe there's a difference with.
We're magnets to people with ADHD and the content itself, right? There's always something special about someone who's in special education or psychology, right? Our brain
Exactly
likely works differently.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes sense if you look at the research. There's some research which is so interesting to show that neurodiverse people connect better with each other, and then neurotypical people connect better with each other. And then it's that between the neurodiverse, neurotypical divide. I always feel people who have those relationships, I'm like, man, you guys must be amazing communicators, because the research indicates that it's a lot harder.
A lot harder, and they do the work, right? And there's also still a lot of work in communication as 2 neurodivergents or 2 neurotypicals, right?
Yeah, I'm actually curious. Is your partner, your husband, neurodiverse or?
So absolutely he is. And so are my 2 stepsons. And we have a 2.5-year-old toddler who is showing symptoms of ADHD. But when I met my husband 6 months after my diagnosis, he was undiagnosed and so were his 2 boys. And he had said, oh, my youngest definitely, I think, has ADHD. He was literally bouncing off the walls out from our house, just jumping off and bouncing. And I said, he has ADHD. The oldest one has ADHD, and so do you. And he goes, no way. I'm like, trust me. So the oldest one is inattentive ADHD, brilliant, probably twice exceptional. And the younger one is hyperactive, and gave my husband, if I had to guess, I don't know if he got a specific type from the psychiatrist, but if I had to guess, he was a combination.
Definitely that. And my husband is also ADHD, so, or ADD specifically. So it's always interesting the mixes.
It comes with a lot of fun, but also a lot of stuff, right? Just like in any marriage, it's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you have that, I was gonna ask you about working with people, but I'm curious, first of all, to know about, obviously, you've got your own family. Like, how do you manage working particularly with adults and kids, like, different age group? It's tricky. How's ADHD showing up differently in those different age groups?
Yeah. So when you're a student, a lot of the difficulty that is being pointed out to the child is in the classroom, or managing the materials, or breaking down long-term assignments, or knowing how to study, using their learning style to help them study, knowing their executive function strengths and weaknesses, being able to bring their materials to school, bring them home, organize that. So a lot of it has to do with academic executive functions, but also it's keeping structure and routine in the house as well, and working with the parents to help come up with a plan that's collaborative between them and the child. So that's what I notice in students, and obviously their frontal lobe is still developing, and
Yeah.
sometimes it could take up until 30 years old for
Oh,
our brains to
really?
develop. Yeah. So
Well, ADHD, is there any research behind the idea that we develop later in terms of frontal lobe?
So I know that social and emotional delay is approximately 30% for people with ADHD. But as far as frontal lobe, I don't know off the top of my head about the research development, but I do know that the research says that generally until the age 25, your brain is developing. But I know with ADHD, it can take longer. But I don't know if the research
Yeah.
directly connects ADHD to that.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be interesting to know. But it is funny because I heard that information and I do feel like it was really in my 30s that like things started to make sense.
Totally. I mean, things are still making sense to me, right? I mean,
Mhm.
besides the fact that you change every year in your 30s, right? We develop and we evolve, and we have different interests, and we different career paths or different journeys in our career. We also, so many people with ADHD have trauma, whether it's big T or small t. And the way that we're showing up for ourselves is not obvious unless we do the work, right? So you and I are in a career where we are doing work constantly for ourselves and for our clients. So I'm
Mhm.
evolving every day. I have new circumstances with my ADHD that I didn't deal with when I was in my 20s or in my 30s, or when I first got diagnosed and felt like I had it under control. Like, I have new sleep issues, new hormonal
Yeah.
issues. I have a
Yeah.
toddler. I have kids with ADHD, kids who are teenagers, a husband. So there's all these different circumstances that can happen at any point of our life, even if our ADHD is managed, that we might not know exactly or be prepared for it.
I think that's a really good point, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about that. But yeah, one of the great pieces of advice I was told was that you have to keep working and developing in order to show up as a good coach, like to continue to show up as a coach. So when, yeah, you do hit those 30s and things, you're sort of experiencing it, but then you're also thinking, how am I going to turn this into strategies? How am I going to turn this into, things that are supportive, which is a weird perspective.
Hey, you listening to this podcast. If you like what we do and you want to hear more of it, there is one way to make sure that that happens. please go ahead, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. We have been told 5-star reviews can help us to get seen by more people, which means more people are going to learn about ADHD strategies.
Just press the button. Just give us a 5-star review.
But yeah, especially the hormones, you mentioned that that's something that a lot of clients have been coming and mentioning, perimenopause, obviously pregnancy, postpartum. I have a 2-month-old, so I have been through all of that. And it's, it's a ride. It's a ride. And even just, even outside of that, because your 30s is a very intense time. Like it feels like, I mean, I'm already halfway through it, but it feels quite intense. Like I feel like in my 20s there was a bit more flexibility, and now in my 30s, especially I think because of kids, it's like everything is just coming
at you. You're
Yeah.
in constant fight or flight when you have a 10-month-old. I mean, you could be really proactive, right? Like maybe you have help or whatever, but when that toddler comes at you, or that baby comes at you and starts screaming, like you go into mom mode immediately.
Yeah, it is interesting, because now I have two. I have a 2.5-year-old and I have a 10-month-old. And it's interesting. I feel like with the first one, it was a lot more that. The second one is just a bundle of sunshine who's been so lovely. So we're very, very lucky.
Oh, you are very lucky.
But yeah. But it is, yeah. And I speak to a lot of people, and there's a sense of time. If we think about ADHD, so much of it is time blindness, struggles with working memory. But when time is so precious, even for neurotypicals, I'm curious, do you have any, strategies that you go to, but people come to you and they say, like, I have no time. Like, I am literally being yelled at almost cool with you. And I need to help this neurodiverse kid as well. So how do you start to unpack that with somebody?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I have noticed even in myself that like time is starting to slip away. So what I will say is when I first got coached, I really did establish boundaries. Now, I didn't have a 2.5-month-old, but I knew that I could only do X amount of work, or I couldn't start my workday before 10 and end after 4, or else my optimal focus time would be out the door. I wouldn't attend to clients the same way. I'd be doing things and really just not performing the way that I needed. And when I listened to those guardrails and those boundaries and I followed them, and I executed the things that were important to me, like exercise, drinking water, eating, sleeping, right? All the basic human hierarchy of needs that we give to our kids that we sometimes don't give to ourselves, then you don't take on as much. And I found recently that, and this can happen to you too, life changes and then things start slipping a little bit, right? And you let things come in where you would have rejected them before. So noticing what you don't want to attend to,
Yeah.
what's too much, the typical, what you can delegate, what you could eliminate, what you can break down. I can't even tell you how many times I have put something on my to-do list of like goals, big actions, right? And I carried over week after week. And then I finally said to myself, right, with accountability after a couple months, like, am I ever going to do this? No, I'm not. I have no plan on my calendar to do this. So I either have to eliminate it, delegate it, or break it down. So I just eliminated it. So being okay with not doing everything, really understanding your optimal focus time, understanding what is a priority with your family, with your work, with your mental health, with your physical health, and then work from there. And if these other things don't fall into it, what can you do about that? And that's where you can do the things that I just mentioned, hire a coach, but we take on so much and have so many expectations as ADHDers
Yes.
that we think, we're super human and we should be doing everything. And that's where the rejection sensitivity comes in, because when we try to do everything, we get burned out, we get overwhelmed, we shut down, we have rejection sensitivity, we compare ourselves to others, we get emotional, and then we are unproductive for days, sometimes on end, sometimes months on end, because we are just so burned out and we shut down.
The burnout cycle is so huge. I think a lot of people don't. I recently shared a story about that because of the fact that I think it's really important to talk about it more, to share the burnout cycle. I feel like when you are in that stage, and luckily that no longer is something that I haven't experienced for years, which is amazing. But it's interesting because you'll see people at that peak, there's that peak where you're like, I'm not burning out. Burning out is a state of mind, just like going and going and going. And they'll be on social media and they'll be doing things and blah, blah, blah. And then they'll disappear, right? Because they're burning out. But if you're somebody who's not paying attention to that, or you don't know them personally, all you're seeing is the peak of those cycles. You're not seeing the burnout part. And so you're thinking,
Amen.
this person is achieving at this amazing level, and why aren't I? And they can do it, I can do it. And, not really knowing.
But also, with that being said, like, I have so many clients who compare themselves, right, to these billionaires, right, who are these huge visionaries, right? And I say to them, like you're saying, like, you don't see the highs and lows, but also you don't know what they're giving up.
Yeah.
How many times have they been divorced? Or, what is their personal and holistic lifestyle? Or are they only meant to work and make billions of dollars? So, like, it could be the ups and downs, like you said, or you're not seeing the downs, but also what are you giving up to sacrifice that intensity of the workaholism or the high achieving perfectionism?
Or even maybe they have a really great life now because they did all of that stuff, and then they learned to delegate and they hired a team because they could afford a team, and they built a system. And so that's like 10, 20 years in the making of having done that. It's often funny, we'll compare ourselves to the people that, are in their like 40s and 50s, and there's someone who's in maybe their 20s and early 30s, and they're like, wow, and I like that. And you're like, well, 10 years and a bunch of pain is between you and that.
But people don't talk about that. And yeah, I like how you mentioned that, because it really needs to be brought up more. Just because you're seeing the highs of someone's lifestyle and they don't talk about their lows, right? They just disappear, like you said, for a week, a month, whatever. Like, talk about that, because people are emulating themselves over this high performer, and it's not reality.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. I mean, one of my personal perspectives that, I know not everyone necessarily agrees with is this idea that, you can live a good, whatever successful means to you, life with ADHD.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, when we're doing the research, we have to pour through the research and put aside a lot of papers that are just like there to add to the negative pile of ADHD and do nothing else. And, I don't believe that. I think that there are strategies that can lead you to have a good, successful life, whatever that means for you.
Full. That means that you're full. You're fulfilled.
Yeah, exactly. But one of those things is, how do we deal with burnout? How do we, those are the things that are part of that conversation.
Yeah, that's literally why my podcast is Successful with 2 L's with ADHD, because
That's so
that
true.
means something different to everyone. But when you can gain the strategies to reframe your thoughts, to accept your limitations, to accept that your brain is wired differently, to understand your strengths, to lean into what works for Skye, for Brooke, right? Not
Mhm.
everyone else, or what you think everyone else is doing. Then with that repetition and that momentum, that brings the flow and the confidence. But some people, this is where the ADHD falls into place, is like, we don't know where to start, right? Sometimes we don't have the right help. We need to talk things out very often with other people so we can get to where we need to faster, right?
Yeah.
Reading a ton of books is great, right? You can get a bundle of information, but what do you do with that, right? How do you execute, and how do you execute small steps over a long period of time? That's where you can feel successful.
I agree. And I think, I'm sort of starting to come to this realization that life, not all of it, but a lot of it is a bit more like an apprenticeship than a classroom, where, if you can connect with somebody who's been there, who has experiences, who has strategies that can support you and knows how to use them, you can go so much faster than if you sort of are by yourself. The internet is great, but you have to search it. It's huge. At this point, it's like kind of like going into the world and just tapping people on the shoulder and being like, do you know?
Right. It's almost like, hey, what do you want for dinner, Skye?
Yeah.
Do you know what you want for dinner?
Not yet.
Right. So now amplify that times a million with information on ADHD out there. Which one works for you? Which one works for you today? Which one works for you for dinner? The internet can't tell you that.
And it's so tricky as well. I've worked with so many people who they'll be like, oh, well, this doesn't work to me. And I'm like, oh, no, it's like if you look at it, this piece of what you're doing here, if you make an adjustment, that's the bit that's missing. And then they do it and then it works. So sometimes it's like
Exactly.
the little adjustments as well.
The littlest thing. I paid a coach a lot of money, when I first started. It was one of my business coaches. And, I thought she was going to amplify my business, all this stuff, right? But the one thing that I got out of it was that 10 to 4, like those are my boundaries, right? And that was worth all of the money in itself. And it was just that like little amplification, like you're talking about,
Yeah.
like stop burning yourself out, work within your time frame and do these other things afterwards or else. But you're right. It's like work with what you have and make those tweaks along the way.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I want to come back to something that you were saying before, which really struck me. You said this idea of treating yourself like your kids or maybe some kids that you know. Because I often tell clients when they come to me with kids, I'm like, okay, well, if you imagine yourself as a child, would you have wanted this? And they're like, no, I would have hated it. It would have sucked. It's like, okay, cool. Well, that's why your kid doesn't want it either. But it's interesting when you think about it in the reverse. It's like, hey, if you gave your kid like this day that was full of work and nothing fun, and then you were like, you're bad because you didn't do it all and you deserve more work, whatever you're doing yourself, like, how would the kids, nieces, nephews, kids, how would they feel?
Horrible about themselves.
Oh, yeah. We do that all the time. We're like, oh no, we don't get to have fun anymore. Fun is for kids. We're adults now. With ADHD, fun is not really an optional thing.
It's so interesting, with metacognition as a typical impairment for someone with ADHD, we aren't reflecting as much as necessary, right? We're not taking a look at how, why, what we're doing. We're not stopping ourselves in that spiral. And when you and I have young kids, right? So when my 2.5-year-old wants water, oh, she's getting water immediately. She'll tell me, right? If she wants to go outside, she's going outside, right? If she wants to sleep, that girl is getting sleep. If she wants food, everyone will know she's hungry,
Yeah.
Why are we attending to our kids differently than we're attending to ourselves? It is so simple. I even read her book the other day and I have it right here. Everyone feels angry sometimes. And in the book, it talked about the lava volcano and how you can escalate in anger, right? And like once you get here, it's too late. You've already erupted and what to do about it, right? But like I have adult clients and, even myself sometimes who we get emotionally dysregulated, right? That is part of ADHD. What do you do about it? Well, think about what your child does, or think about what you teach your child. Those simple strategies will help you too. The deep breaths in. We're constantly looking for the shiny thing that's going to help us, but sometimes we already have those tools and we just have to look into what we're doing for our kids and what we did for ourselves as young children.
Yeah, that's a good question. And now I'm curious. Someone asked, what do you do when you're like emotionally dysregulated? What's your go-to?
It's a great question. My biggest go-to is to go downstairs because I work upstairs in my office, get a glass of water or a bottle, and go outside and just sit on my chair outside. I live in Florida, so it's hot pretty much all year. So I go outside, I look at the trees, and I naturally just breathe. And it could be 30 seconds.
Yeah.
But that for me is a proactive break that is nourishing my mind, nourishing my body, and it's going to help me regulate. When I feel overwhelmed in verbal communication, right? When things are going sideways, I'll literally just stop and come back. It's kind of the same thing. If I feel dysregulated, I stop, get the water, take a break, and come back. And I'm almost always feel 10 times better.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great one. And it's funny. I do the walk, like going for a walk, even if it's just like a loop, a very small loop, but I don't do the water. I need to do that water. That one is a good reminder.
Hey, I just spoke to Jim Quick and we were talking about how like our brain is 75 to 80% water.
Oh, yeah.
So, we're dehydrated most of the time because we're not drinking water. So how can we function and think if we're not drinking water?
Exactly. And this is a very specific thing to those of you who are feeding your kids currently. But you need more water if that's happening. So there's a lot of positions you might be in where you need extra water and your brain, I don't know, ADHD is funny. We don't always know what we need. I work with a lot of people where it's like, taking a shower can be difficult, brushing your teeth can be
Yep.
difficult, drinking water can be difficult. We can be not as aware of our basic needs, why I think it's so great you brought it up at the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, our basic needs in the showering and breathing and drinking water and stuff like that, right? Like
Yeah.
that and doing it small and being okay. I just got off of a group call with one of my clients and she was shaming herself for folding one piece of laundry and walking to her room and putting it away and then coming back and folding the second piece. So we dug into that a little bit deeper. I was like, why is that a problem? Well, I wasn't as productive as I could have been. I'm like, yeah, you're right. You could have been more productive if you folded everything and then put it away. But you know that. Why do you think you did it? And she came to the conclusion that like she didn't know if she was going to do the whole thing, right? So she was
Yeah.
just doing one at a time. It felt good to walk while she was doing it and listen,
Yeah.
right? It gave her that stimulation. And she got her laundry done. Like,
Yeah.
how amazing is that?
Yeah.
But we shame ourselves for that.
I think it's great. I mean, another example is sometimes with people who are getting things done, they're like, I have to turn everything off and I have to do it as fast as possible. And I'm like, you don't have to. You could put some music on a podcast and
You
maybe you'll
can
do
do
it extra
whatever
slow.
you want.
Yeah, but you'll get it done. Like, so, and sometimes it is helpful, especially with ADHD, to think about the comparison of like, okay, if I'm not doing this the quote unquote perfect way, am I doing it at all? Because sometimes the answer is, if we're really honest with ourselves, no. And so it's like, yeah, I have to do it like that, and that's totally okay, and I'm gonna get it done. And maybe it takes me a little bit longer than other people to fill out a form, to be honest.
Oh, forms and ADHD.
Couple of things. But I do other things way faster. So, it all evens out.
Exactly. In my book, I talk about the 1% and activate your ADHD potential. And like that first thing is, okay, when things are chaotic for you with ADHD, are you tending to your hierarchy of needs? And if not, do that. But also at the same time, do 1% action towards whatever goal it is that you have. Because that 1% will make you feel better too, just naturally, because you're getting something done and you're also taking care of yourself. And if we could just have that 1% mentality over time, well, we know that 1% over 100 days is 100%. But like we look at the mountain and say, we haven't gotten to the mountain yet, right? Well, how do you get to the top of the mountain? You have to walk, right? And it takes time. And I think that goes back to those peaks and valleys that you're talking about with these influencers online
I was
who
just thinking
people
that.
look
Yeah.
at, right? And they're like, oh, they got to that peak. Yeah, they got there, but we don't know how they got there. And also, what's the cost and what's the downfall?
Yeah, just because somebody goes to the top of the mountain, they could be unprepared at the top of that mountain. They could have a really hard trek down. They could have like pushed themselves to the brink. Maybe they did it really well and they had a great time, but it took a lot longer than you realize. So there's so many different situations. All we know is that they're at the top of the mountain or at the top of the mountain. There might be more mountain. It's like they could see way more mountain than you can see at the
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Another thing, someone had come to me at the ADHD conference. A few people did in the International ADHD conference last year. And they were like, I want to know how you built your company. And I'm like, okay, what do you know about me? Right. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because like all they see is follower count, achievements, but they have no idea what's under the surface. Right. And I would love to, with our conversation, like expose that more, right? It's not rainbows and butterflies, and it takes a lot of hard work.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, I'm all ears. Tell me what is under the surface.
Well, no, to your point, it took a lot of processes, right? And I would say any business after 2 years goes through a weird period of time where you can plateau. And 50% of businesses or business owners quit. So the 50% of people who stay. And then 2 or 3 years later, 50% of those people quit because they have that weird plateau period again. So now we're looking at, let's say, roughly 25% of people who stay. That happened to me. I was kicking, you know what, and taking names, but then I burnt myself out because I was taking 25 clients a week. It's like, this is unsustainable for me. Brought on coaches, started giving some of my clients to them. That worked out. But then I brought on more help. And with more help is more overhead, right? So then that needed to play its course. I had to reevaluate, I had to change systems. And then here I am again, 6 years later. Now the market's changed. A lot of people are becoming ADHD coaches. And it's great because we have a lot of people who need help. But there's, of course, a sea of coaches right now, right? So obviously that comes with more competition and all of that. So it's reevaluating now. Things are not the same as they were in 2022. Like it or not, we're going through a recession right now in the US, like we are. And so that's another factor. People just cannot afford to live the same way that they used to. Things and products that they bought because they had this excess of money, they have to think more about their spending. So the economy's changed, the competition has changed, people's mindsets have changed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one I know what you mean. When I first started a while ago, and not as long ago as you, but a while ago, the biggest problem was telling people what an ADHD coach was. Nobody knew what it was. And nobody knew how to even find it. There was like one book here. Hallowell had written about it in a book. And like
Yeah.
everyone was like that. So you had to literally be like, I'm this. And then everyone was like, what is that? And now when you say it, people are like, oh, that's really cool. Like I know this person, that person. But I will say, before we did this, actually, I used to run a frozen food company. So totally different company. This is a seeking company.
You're
And
getting me hungry.
but it closed during COVID. Like the whole thing shut down because in New Zealand, everything, everyone's different, but it was just a complete shutdown. So we went from like selling vegan frozen food, which is totally different, and learning sort of how things work, in that way. And I was doing the ADHD. I was like helping in schools with ADHD, but I wasn't thinking about making it a business really because I had a business and this was more of a passion. And then everything shut down. And so that was a huge like journey that doesn't come up. I'm not writing that in. Maybe I should. Maybe I should put that in my bio.
Yeah. No, I think that ADHD people can be resilient. And clearly
Oh, yeah.
you were, right? And you knew it was time to pivot. And at the same time, we can be so stuck in our emotions that we feel like we failed, that we want to stick it through, right? And make it better. But sometimes it's knowing when to walk away and starting something new or shifting something. And I think that's where the resilience like can come faster when you're talking it out with someone.
Definitely. And also, pivoting can be great. And that's the thing. Like, pivoting does not mean failure. Like, I thank my lucky star. Well, not really, but because I know it was terrible. But like, I am long term grateful that we don't run that business anymore because it was very much attached to a particular time, a particular space. It would have had a lot less flexibility. It definitely would have involved a lot more burnout. It was just that kind of business. You were literally, making food and trying to do things with food is very difficult. This
Right.
is just much better suited, to how I like to work. So I think a lot of people see pivoting as failure. And I think that can be really dangerous because it means that you don't want to do it.
Think about the way our thoughts are, right? They're not linear, right? And that's, I think, the same thing with pivoting. It's like we all have a North Star of where we want to be, but sometimes our direction changes to get to that North Star, or sometimes the North Star changes too. So I think it's knowing when to pivot. That's the big thing, right? Doing that faster than not.
I did have a question for you because I saw that you won awards and done very cool things. And I wanted to know, have you ever struggled with imposter syndrome?
All the time. Well, that's why I said to you, like when people came up to me last year, said, "Oh my God, I want to do what you do." Like, blah, blah, blah. I was like, first of all, way overwhelmed. And second of all, why? Why do you see this in me? Like, I'm just going along for the journey and like doing it, like I don't see, I mean this authentically. Like I don't see what some other people see. So I have struggled with imposter syndrome my whole life. I know with a woman, we're like 70% more likely to have imposter syndrome. And then you add ADHD to the mix. But
Yeah.
I do my best to reflect and set my intentions and create a log of awesome of all the things that I'm proud of. So I can look at that and be like, oh, yeah, I did do cool things.
I did that. I forgot. Yeah, no, totally. Working memory and imposter syndrome is a dangerous combination.
All right, what's next now?
Yeah. What? We won an award? I'm not lying. That was 2023.
Yeah, exactly. It's 2024 now. Let's move on to our next book.
But it's very, very true. And it's good to talk about it, I think.
And laugh about it. And I think that's huge. I'm glad that you bring that up. And Dr. Hallowell, speaking of him, he talks about having people say something to you like a compliment and how that can be euphoric for someone with ADHD. So to your point, I don't think it's bad to ask people what their perception is of you, if you trust them, or what they saw you doing well. That can really resonate with us and it can slow our tracks down and make us feel good. Because intrinsic self esteem, true self esteem, is really hard to have, right?
Yeah. I meet people occasionally with that, and I'm just like, wow, it must be so
And
fun.
who are these unicorns? I want to meet them.
But
What
also,
did they do to get there?
yeah, I don't know if I could be doing this if I naturally had that. I think it's one of those chicken and meat things. It is interesting.
Yeah. Dr. Gabor Mate talks about that. He says, true self-esteem is really hard to get. And most people get self-esteem by doing things and then getting rewards from those things.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and we all have spiky profiles. We all have things we really suck at, and that's okay because we have things we're really great at.
Exactly. It's about leaning into what we're really great at, because if we focus only on the weaknesses and we don't understand our strengths, then we get
Yeah.
stressed, anxious, and depressed, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's someone else who's amazing at that thing. So if you can find that person, then you're in a
And you're
wonderful
doing
place.
them a favor. You are paying, you're giving someone a job. Dan Sullivan talks about that. He's a strategic coach and he actually has ADHD. And he says that I think 50% of his clients have ADHD as well. Like, don't feel bad because you're opening up a job for someone else who actually enjoys that.
It's funny. I was listening to Dan Sullivan this morning before I came on the podcast. I was listening to
We're on the same wavelength.
It's so funny. And I was thinking, this guy's got ADHD for sure.
100% he does. He admits it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's so funny. Oh, that's great. That's definitely the same wavelength. Also, well, I just have a couple of questions that we ask everyone. So tell us about a professional achievement that you're the most proud of.
Right after our imposter syndrome
right after that.
conversation. Okay. Well, we just hit 100 Google reviews and
Wow.
5 stars. And
wow, that's cool.
yeah, I want to celebrate that because it's not about 100. It's about the impact that it created on the people who wrote those reviews. We've been in over 25 different countries, worked with over 1,000 clients over the past 6 years. And yeah, it feels really good to know that the work that you love so much is impacting so many people. So that's what I'm proud of.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I love that. And on the other side, do you have a professional failure that embarrasses you? And how did you deal with that?
Definitely. When I was a special education teacher, I was tapped on the shoulder to be an IEP coordinator. I became it. And naturally, I went and got my administrative degree because I said, well, this is the route that I have to go because this is what other people see in me. It's a 2-year path. I was 1 year in, and then I got tapped on the shoulder to take over my boss's job as assistant director of special education. And I was elated. I didn't even know I wanted the job, but I was elated, right? And they came back to me and said, the board didn't approve you getting this role because you don't have the full degree yet. And my ego at that point was totally burnt. So instead of sticking it out in the district that I was in, which I loved the people, I loved I just loved everything. It's great culture. Number 1 district in the country. I moved districts to get the job that they previously offered me at the school that I was working at. And I did it out of ego. Of course, I wanted to advance because I was an undiagnosed ADHDer at the time. But at the same time, I knew going into that job before I even accepted the job that it wasn't for me. The culture wasn't right. So I say this like as a catch-22 because if I didn't do that, then I wouldn't be here, right? If I didn't leave the district that I love so much to go to another district to essentially do the same thing that I was doing, but just a different title, then I wouldn't have quit and started ADHD coaching and figured out my journey because I would have just been so enthralled with the culture that I was in previously. But I don't know if I would have truly 100% loved staying in that same role. Anyway, so like I'm saying this like that was a regret, but at the same time, it needed to happen for me to understand my journey right now. I think everything happens. I truly think that everything in our professional journey happens for a reason.
Yeah. It's all one big circle. We come back and we need to. And what is your favorite dopamine activity? What do you do for a boost? What's your go-to? Is it the sit outside with the water?
That and go into my car and jam out in music. Like
love that.
Listen to YouTube music. Robin, I don't know if you know who she is, but like from the 90s, 2000s. And I let all of the 90s, 2000 music just like play really loud and I jam out to it. And sometimes I even dance.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. I also jam out to music as well. That's a very cool one. So if you had an ADHD life motto, what would it be?
You're okay. You're going to be okay. And you don't have to do things the way other people do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think that's amazing and so, so true. Well, thank you so much, Brooke, for chatting with me. This has been an amazing, awesome conversation. Tell people where they can find you.
Yeah. Everything is coaching with Brooke with an E. So Instagram is our biggest platform. Our website's Coaching with Brooke. And I have a book that was in 2003. So I don't know, maybe I'm working on another one, but it's called Activate Your ADHD Potential. It's a workbook book, and it has all of my strategies that I've coached the past 6 years, my signature process, 3C activation. So feel free to check it out on Amazon. That's it.
Awesome. Well, great chatting to you.
You too.
Thank you for listening, everyone. And a big thank you to Adam for making us sound great and Anastasia for making us look great. We couldn't do it without you.
And if you're looking for any of the references to the papers that we discuss, head on over to our show notes page because I always bring the receipts.
Plus, if you want to find out more about us or any more deep diving into what we're doing, you can find us on Substack. That's where the community is. That's where we're chatting. And you can see all of the fun and exciting things that we are bringing to the table.
Thanks for being here.